July 28th, 1794, 4 in the afternoon, a cart rattles through Paris streets, choked with the biggest crowd the city has ever seen. Inside rides the man they once called the Incorruptible. His jaw hangs shattered. Blood soaks the dirty linen wrapped around his face. Maximilien Robespierre is about to meet the guillotine he sent 17,000 to. But this story doesn't end when the blade drops. It begins. 24 hours. That's how long it took for Paris to transform from a city ruled by terror into something unrecognizable. The prisons emptied. The Committee of Public Safety collapsed. 70 heads rolled in a single day, and ordinary Parisians did something they hadn't dared in months. They celebrated in the streets. You think revolutions end with a single death? You're wrong. They end with what happens next. At exactly 6:19 in the evening on July 28th, Charles-Henri Sanson, the public executioner, yanked away Robespierre's bloodied bandage. The crowd heard him scream, then silence. The reign of terror was over. But the Thermidorian reaction had just begun. What happened in the next 24 hours would reshape France forever. Deputies who had cowered in fear suddenly found their voices. Prison wardens unlocked cells they'd kept sealed for months. Market women who had whispered in shadows now shouted in the streets. And in drawing rooms across Paris, people who hadn't dared speak Robespierre's name without trembling began planning his replacement. If you value documented revolutionary history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Jacques-Joseph Cassin's eyewitness memoirs published in 1843 or so, and Colin Jones' exhaustive hour-by-hour account, The Fall of Robespierre, 24 Hours in Revolutionary Paris, published by Oxford University Press in 2021. Now back to the information. 6:27 p.m., July 28th. The executioner holds up Robespierre's head. Deputy Jacques-Joseph Cassignes watches from the crowd. When at last it was severed from his body and the executioner held it by the hair to show to the people, it presented an indescribably horrible sight. The crowd erupts in applause that lasts 15 minutes straight. 15 minutes? That's how long Paris had been holding its breath. But here's what the history books miss. The real revolution wasn't happening at the guillotine. It was happening in the convention hall 6 blocks away. 6:45 p.m. The National Convention receives word Robespierre is dead. Deputy Jean-Lambert Tallien, the man who brought him down, doesn't celebrate. He's already drafting emergency orders. First priority, dismantle the Committee of Public Safety's power before anyone else can seize it. Second, empty the prisons before the crowds storm them. Third, execute the 70 Paris Commune members who stayed loyal to Robespierre. All in the next 18 hours, 7 p.m. The convention votes. The Committee of Public Safety loses its authority to rule France. Just like that, no debate, no discussion. The body that had governed through terror for 14 months becomes just another committee. Power transfers to the convention itself. Democracy by exhaustion. 7:30 p.m. Emergency orders go out to every prison in Paris. La Force, the Conciergerie, Saint-Lazare, Sainte-Pélagie. Release all prisoners arrested under the law of suspects. Immediately. No paperwork, no trials, no questions. The prison wardens can't believe it. Neither can the guards. 8 p.m. The doors swing open. At La Force prison, 300 prisoners stumble into the Paris evening. Many haven't seen daylight in 6 months, some longer. They shield their eyes against the setting sun. Guards who had brutalized them hours before now step aside in silence. One prisoner, merchant Philippe Durand, later writes, "I thought I was dreaming. The same men who locked my cell that morning unlocked it that evening and told me to leave. No explanation. Just go." 8:45 p.m. Sainte-Pélagie prison empties 200 more. The Conciergerie releases 150. Saint-Lazare opens its gates to 400. In one night, Paris frees over 1,000 suspected enemies of the revolution. The largest prison release in the city's history. But the committee's enemies aren't done. They want blood, different blood. 9 p.m. Convention troops surround the Hôtel de Ville. Inside, the remaining Paris Commune officials who had supported Robespierre cower in the same building where their leader spent his final hours. They know what's coming. The convention has already declared them outlaws. No trial, no defense, just death. François Henriot, commander of the Paris National Guard, tries to rally his men one last time. The same Henriot who had terrorized the convention for months, now his own guards abandon him. His cannon remains silent. His authority evaporates like morning mist. 9:30 p.m. Henriot is dragged from the Hôtel de Ville with a broken leg. Jean-Baptiste Fleuriot-Lecote, mayor of Paris, follows. So do 68 other commune officials. They're loaded into carts bound for the Conciergerie. Tomorrow they'll meet the guillotine. But Paris isn't just emptying prisons and filling tumbrils. The city is celebrating. 10 p.m. The taverns fill. For the first time in months, Parisians dare to drink and talk politics openly. At the Café Procope, lawyer Pierre Vergniaud raises a toast. To the end of the terror, the crowd roars. At the Café de Foix, market women sing the Marseillaise, not the revolutionary version. The original, 10:30 p.m., the theaters reopen. The Comédie Française, shuttered for weeks, lights its candles. The Théâtre de la République announce an emergency performance. The audience floods in. They don't care what's on stage. They just want to be somewhere public, somewhere safe, somewhere they can applaud without fear. 11 p.m. The Palais Royal comes alive. Street vendors return to corners they'd abandoned. Prostitutes emerge from hiding. Gamblers set up their tables. The marketplace of sin that Robespierre had tried to purge reasserts itself in 2 hours. But the real action isn't in the streets. It's in the drawing rooms. 11:15 p.m. Rue Saint-Honoré, the same street where Robespierre lived. Madame de Staël's salon reopens its doors for the first time since the terror began. The intellectual elite of Paris, those who survived, gather to plot the future. They're not celebrating. They're calculating. Paul Barras arrives first, the deputy who helped orchestrate Robespierre's fall. He's already thinking about power structures, government forms, economic policies. Joseph Fouché follows, the man who had terrorized Lyon but turned against his former ally just in time. They don't shake hands. They don't need to. The conversation is simple. Who rules France now? Midnight. Exactly 24 hours before Robespierre fell, the city that had trembled in silence for 14 months breathes freely. But freedom isn't order, and order isn't democracy. At the Tuileries Palace, night clerks work by candlelight, burning documents, not just any documents, the arrest warrants, the surveillance reports, the denunciation letters that had filled the terror's filing cabinets. Thousands of papers turned to ash, evidence of who had informed on who had signed death sentences, who had profited from confiscated property. The bureaucracy of terror disappears in smoke. 12:30 a.m., July 29th. The real test begins. Convention President Marc-Guillaume Vadier calls an emergency session. Not for tomorrow. Now, in the middle of the night, the deputies who had spent months afraid to speak their minds must now rebuild a government from scratch. They face 3 immediate crises. First, the economy. Robespierre's price controls had kept bread affordable but destroyed production. Farmers hoard grain. Workers strike for wages. The assignat currency loses value daily. Without the terror's coercion, who will enforce economic policy? Second, the war. France still fights Austria, Prussia, Britain, Spain. The armies need supplies, reinforcements, leadership. Robespierre's committee had managed the war through terror. The new government must manage it through something else. But what? Third, the provinces. Lyon still smolders from its brutal suppression. The Vendée rebels still fight. Toulon recently fell to Republican forces. Local Jacobin clubs still control dozens of cities. Will they accept Robespierre's fall? Will they resist? Will they declare independence? 1 a.m., Deputy Bertrand Barrère takes the podium, the man they call the Anacreon of the guillotine for his flowery speeches justifying mass executions. Now he speaks differently. Citizens, we must heal France. We must restore justice. We must end the cycle of vengeance that has consumed us. The deputies listen in stunned silence. This from the man who had advocated exterminating entire populations. This from the architect of the law of suspects. This from Robespierre's closest ally until yesterday. But Barrère isn't finished. He proposes the unthinkable. Amnesty, not for everyone, not for real criminals, but for the thousands arrested on suspicion, denunciation, association. For the crime of knowing someone who knew someone who opposed the revolution. The debate erupts. Deputy Joseph Cambon, who had started Robespierre's downfall by calling him out in the convention, demands caution. We cannot simply forgive and forget. There must be accountability. There must be justice. Deputy Jean-Baptiste Carrière, who had drowned thousands at Nantes, agrees. The people demand retribution. They demand answers. They demand blood. But Deputy Jean Lambert, Tallien, architect of the coup, sees the danger. If we continue the cycle of vengeance, we become what we overthrew. We become terrorists in different clothing. 1:30 a.m. The vote. Amnesty for political prisoners. 412 in favor, 208 against, 97 abstentions. France chooses forgiveness over vengeance. For the first time in 5 years. But forgiveness has a price. 2 a.m. The news spreads through Paris like wildfire. Political prisoners will be freed. The law of suspects is suspended. The revolutionary tribunal's powers are curtailed. The maximum price controls are under review. The reaction is immediate and divided. In the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, the working-class district that had supported Robespierre, crowds gather in angry confusion. These are the sans-culottes, the without breeches, the urban poor who had driven the revolution from the beginning. They had supported the terror because it targeted their enemies, nobles, priests, wealthy merchants. Now their protector is dead. Their enemies are being freed. Their economic lifeline, price controls on bread and meat, faces elimination. They don't celebrate. They mourn. 2:15 a.m. The Café des Amis in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. Carpenter, Jean-Baptiste Lemoine, slams his fist on the table. They've killed the people's friend. They've freed the people's enemies. Next, they'll bring back the king. Shoemaker Pierre Drouet agrees. Mark my words. The rich will return. The priests will return. The nobles will reclaim their estates, and we'll be back where we started. They're not wrong. 2:30 a.m. Across the city in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, the wealthy district that had suffered most under the terror, the mood is different. In elegant townhouses that had been shuttered for months, candles burn in windows, curtains that had remained drawn for fear of attracting attention part to reveal silhouettes celebrating. Madame de Polignac, who had fled to Austria in 1789, receives word of Robespierre's death through secret channels. She immediately begins planning her return to France. So do hundreds of other émigré nobles scattered across Europe. The revolution's enemies smell opportunity. 3 a.m. The convention continues its emergency session. Deputy after deputy rises to speak. Not about ideology, not about principles, about practical problems that can't wait for dawn. The postal system has collapsed. Letters of denunciation had overwhelmed the mail service. Now nobody trusts the post. How do you run a country when citizens can't communicate? The tax system has collapsed. Revolutionary governments had relied on confiscating enemy property. With enemies being freed, where does money come from? The court system has collapsed. Revolutionary tribunals had replaced regular courts. With tribunals being dismantled, who tries criminals? Who enforces contracts? Who settles disputes? The church system has collapsed. Dechristianization had closed most churches. Priests had fled or died. With religious freedom being restored, who performs marriages? Who buries the dead? Who comforts the grieving? France isn't just ending the terror. France is rebuilding civilization. 3:30 a.m. Deputy Georges Coutin's name comes up. He had been Robespierre's closest ally, part of the triumvirate that ruled France. Yesterday, he shared the guillotine with his master, but Coutin had been more than a terrorist. He'd been a legal scholar. He'd helped draft the Constitution of 1793, the most democratic document in European history. With Coutin dead, who understands the legal framework holding the Republic together? Who can interpret the laws he helped write? Who can explain the institutions he helped create? The answer, nobody. 4 a.m. Paris Police Commander Jean-Baptiste d'Aubsint reports to the convention. Crime has exploded in 6 hours. Burglaries in the Marais, assaults in Montmartre, robberies on the Ile de la Cité. The terror's surveillance network, brutal but effective, has vanished overnight. Citizens who had been afraid to steal bread now steal silver. Chaos isn't just political. It's criminal. 4:15 a.m. The financial markets that had been frozen under Robespierre begin moving, not officially. The bourse is still closed, but in coffeehouses and private apartments, merchants who had hoarded goods for months start calculating, if price controls end, what will bread cost? What will meat cost? What will cloth cost? Their answers terrify the deputies. Without the maximum, the price control law, bread could triple in price within weeks. Meat could become unaffordable for workers. Basic necessities could spark riots that would make the terror look gentle. The economic math is brutal. Keep price controls and destroy production, or eliminate price controls and destroy consumption. 4:30 a.m., a messenger arrives from Lyon. The city's Jacobin club has declared its loyalty to Robespierre's memory and its rejection of the new government. Local officials refuse to recognize the convention's authority. The garrison remains neutral. Another messenger arrives from Marseille. Similar news. The Jacobin Club demands revenge for Robespierre's execution. Local authorities waver. A third messenger arrives from Bordeaux. The situation is different, but equally dangerous. Moderate Republicans, persecuted under the terror, are forming armed bands to hunt down local Jacobins. They want blood, just different blood. France faces civil war. Again, 5 a.m. Dawn breaks over Paris. The first light reveals a city transformed but not unified. In the eastern districts where workers live, black flags hang from windows in mourning for Robespierre. In the western districts where merchants live, tricolor flags celebrate his death. The same city, the same revolution, two completely different reactions. At the Hôtel Dieu hospital, surgeons work through the night, treating victims of street fighting, not political violence. Economic violence. As news spreads that price controls might end, riots break out at bakeries. Citizens who had waited patiently in bread lines for months suddenly panic about future scarcity. Dr. Antoine Fourcroy, the hospital's chief surgeon, writes in his journal, "We thought the killing would stop with Robespierre's death. Instead, it's just changing form. Yesterday, we treated victims of political terror. Today, we treat victims of economic fear." 5:30 a.m. The convention receives its first foreign intelligence report since Robespierre's fall. Austrian forces are massing near Strasbourg. Prussian troops are moving toward Mainz. British ships are blockading Brest. Europe's monarchies had feared Robespierre's radicalism, but they had respected his ruthless efficiency. The new government appears weak, divided, chaotic. The perfect time to invade. Foreign Minister Charles-François Delacroix faces an impossible choice: negotiate from weakness or fight from chaos. 6 a.m. The shift change at the Conciergerie prison. Night guards hand over keys to day guards, but the keys unlock empty cells. Of the prison's normal population of 800, fewer than 100 remain, and those are common criminals, not political prisoners. The remaining inmates can't believe their eyes. Cell blocks that had been packed yesterday echo empty today. The silence is deafening. Prison guard Antoine Fouquier-Richer later writes, "In 20 years of prison work, I never witnessed anything like it. We went from overcrowded to nearly vacant in 12 hours. The prisoners who remained kept asking, 'Are we next? Are we free too?' We had no answers." 6:30 a.m. The bread lines form as usual throughout Paris, but something is different. The conversations are different. Instead of whispers and glances, people speak openly about politics, about the future, about hopes they hadn't dared voice in months. At the Boulangerie Garnier near the Panthéon, baker Michel Dubois serves his usual customers with unusual news. The flour allocation is being reviewed. The price restrictions might change. Buy what you can today. The customers don't panic. They don't hoard. They ask questions. When might prices change? How much might they change? What alternatives exist? These are conversations that had been impossible under the terror. Citizens discussing government policy without fear. Citizens planning for the future without expecting death. It's democracy returning to daily life. 7 a.m. The convention's emergency session continues. 18 hours of continuous debate. The deputies are exhausted, but they can't stop. Too many decisions can't wait. Deputy Marc Guillaume Vadier proposes a radical idea: truth and reconciliation. Not just amnesty for political prisoners, but public testimony about the terror's abuses. Let citizens speak, let victims tell their stories, let perpetrators confess their crimes. The proposal sparks fierce debate. Deputy Joseph Fouché, who had committed atrocities in Lyon, opposes it. Opening old wounds serves no purpose. We must move forward, not backward. But Deputy Olympe de Gouges' sister, Marie, who had survived imprisonment, supports it. Without truth, there can be no healing. Without acknowledgement, there can be no trust. The vote is close. Truth and reconciliation fails by 12 votes. France chooses forgetting over remembering. 7:30 a.m., the market women arrive at Les Halles, Paris' central market. For months, they had been the terror's informal surveillance network. Market women reported suspicious conversations, unusual purchases, unpatriotic behavior. Their gossip had filled denunciation letters. Now they face each other with new uncertainty. Who had informed on whom? Who had saved whom? Who could be trusted? Fish seller Marie-Jeanne Leprince approaches vegetable vendor Catherine Méricourt, whom she had suspected of denouncing her nephew. Instead of confrontation, she offers reconciliation. The terror is over. Our old quarrels should end with it. Méricourt responds, "I never denounced anyone, but I understand why you thought I did. We all lived in fear. We all made mistakes." The market women negotiate their own peace treaty. 8 a.m. The Jacobin Club of Paris holds an emergency meeting. Not in its usual hall. That's been sealed by convention guards. In a private apartment on Rue Saint-Honoré. Barely 30 members attend. Yesterday, the club had over 800. The discussion is desperate. Should they resist the new government? Should they flee France? Should they accept the political changes? Jean-Marie Collot d'Herbois, who had been Robespierre's ally on the Committee of Public Safety, advocates resistance. The revolution is betrayed. The people are abandoned. We must fight. But Claude Javogue, who had terrorized the countryside around Lyon, counsels surrender. Fighting now means civil war. Civil war means foreign invasion. Foreign invasion means counter-revolution. The club votes to dissolve itself. The organization that had driven the revolution for 5 years commits suicide. 8:30 a.m. The news reaches the provinces through the optical telegraph system that connects Paris to major cities. Robespierre dead, terror ended, prisoners freed, government changed. The reactions vary dramatically. In Rouen, moderate Republicans celebrate in the streets. In Nancy, Jacobins barricade themselves in the town hall. In Lille, the garrison mutinies against its officers. In Dijon, peasants attack the estates of former nobles who might now return. France fragments along political lines that had been frozen by terror. 9 a.m. The 24-hour mark approaches since Robespierre's execution. Paris wakes to a city that resembles itself but operates completely differently. The same streets carry different conversations. The same buildings house different activities. The same people express different opinions. At the Café de Chartres, literary figures who had been silent for months begin planning new publications. At the Bourse, which is still officially closed, merchants begin planning new investments. At the churches, which are still officially shuttered, priests begin planning new services. Civil society rebuilds itself one conversation at a time. 9:30 a.m. The strangest development: former prisoners begin returning to the same neighborhoods where their accusers live. The blacksmith, who had denounced the baker for hoarding grain, meets the baker buying bread at the same market. The seamstress, who had informed on the lawyer for counter-revolutionary correspondence, encounters the lawyer consulting clients in the same district. These aren't confrontations. These are negotiations. How do former enemies become neighbors again? Most choose uncomfortable civility over open hostility. They nod in recognition. They avoid direct conversation. They rebuild community through small gestures, sharing news, offering assistance, acknowledging shared experiences. It's reconciliation without resolution. 10 a.m. The administrative machinery of government begins adapting to new realities. Clerks who had spent months processing arrest warrants now process release orders. Judges who had rubber-stamped death sentences now review suspended cases. Police who had conducted midnight raids now investigate ordinary crimes. The same people, the same offices, completely different functions. At the Ministry of Interior, Deputy Minister Jean-Baptiste Leclerc reviews the files of the newly released prisoners. Many are prominent citizens, doctors, lawyers, merchants, engineers, people whose skills France desperately needs. But many are also traumatized, impoverished, broken by months of imprisonment. They need medical care, financial support, psychological healing. The state that had terrorized them must now restore them. The bureaucracy of reconciliation proves more complex than the bureaucracy of terror. 10:30 a.m. Foreign diplomats in Paris begin sending urgent reports to their capitals. The British ambassador, still technically at war with France, reports, "The government appears stable but weak. The people appear relieved but divided. This may be our opportunity to negotiate favorable terms." The Prussian ambassador concurs, "French military discipline will likely deteriorate without terror's coercion. Their armies may become unreliable." But the Spanish ambassador dissents. Removing the terror may actually strengthen France. People will fight for freedom more willingly than they fought for survival. Europe watches and calculates. 11 a.m. The convention prepares for its most controversial decision yet: the fate of the 70 Paris Commune officials arrested the previous night. These aren't abstract political enemies. These are men who had governed Paris for months, men with families, supporters, influence. Deputy Jean-Lambert Tallien argues for swift execution. They supported Robespierre to the end. They threatened the convention's authority. They represent the old tyranny. But Deputy Jacques-Alexis Thuriot argues for trials. We cannot become what we overthrew. We cannot execute without justice. The debate reveals the new government's fundamental contradiction. How do you end terror through terror? 11:15 a.m. While the convention debates, the condemned men prepare to die. At the conciergerie, the 70 commune officials write final letters, not political manifestos, personal farewells. François Henriot, the National Guard commander who had terrorized the convention for months, writes to his wife, "I regret nothing I did for the people. I regret everything I did to individuals. Tell my children their father tried to serve justice but served vengeance instead." Jean-Baptiste Fleuriot-Lecotte, mayor of Paris, writes to his daughter, "The revolution demanded sacrifices. I gave my life willingly. But I never wanted it to demand yours. Live better than we governed." These aren't monsters writing. These are men facing death for political choices that seemed righteous yesterday and criminal today. 11:30 a.m. The vote: execute the 70 immediately. No trials, no appeals. No mercy. The margin: 408 in favor, 312 against, 103 abstentions. Democracy chooses expedience over justice. Again. But this time, the expedience serves moderation instead of extremism. Noon, 20 hours after Robespierre's execution. The city changes in ways nobody expected. Street crime continues rising. Without the terrorist surveillance network, ordinary criminals operate freely. But political informants have vanished. Citizens can speak without fear of denunciation. The trade-off is stark. Physical safety decreases while psychological freedom increases. At the Café de la Régence, chess players who had avoided political conversation for months now debate government policies openly, not in whispers, in normal voices. Other customers listen without taking notes. Nobody reports suspicious opinions. This is what democracy sounds like: messy, chaotic, fearless. 12:30 p.m. The tumbrils roll again through Paris streets. But this time, the crowds don't cheer. They watch in uncomfortable silence. These aren't aristocrats or priests being carted to death. These aren't mysterious enemies of the people. These are local officials they recognized, interacted with, knew personally. The execution of the commune officials feels different from the execution of Robespierre, less like justice, more like revenge. 1 p.m., Place de la Révolution. The guillotine stands ready for its final mass execution. 70 men will die in the next 2 hours, the largest mass execution in Paris history. But the crowd is smaller than yesterday. Many Parisians stay home. They've seen enough death. They want the killing to end completely, not just change targets. The executioners work efficiently. One head every 90 seconds. No speeches, no ceremony. Industrial death. Charles-Henri Sanson, the public executioner, later writes, "I had executed kings and commoners, nobles and peasants, priests and atheists, but that day felt different. We were executing the revolution itself." 1:30 p.m. The first heads fall. François Henriot dies 4th. Jean-Baptiste Fleuriot-Lescaut dies 18th. Claude Payan, Robespierre's protégé who had controlled Paris, dies 32nd. The crowd watches in near silence. Occasional applause, more often uncomfortable murmurs. One woman, Marie-Catherine Renard, whose husband had been executed by the Revolutionary Tribunal, shouts, "Enough! No more blood, no more death." Others take up the cry, "Enough! Enough!" The executioners continue working, but the crowd's mood has shifted, from bloodthirsty to blood-weary. 2 p.m. The 70th head falls. The largest mass execution in Paris history ends not with celebration, but with relief. The crowd disperses quickly. People want to go home, not to taverns. The Thermidorian reaction has claimed its first victims, but it has also claimed its last mass victims. Never again will Paris witness industrial execution on this scale. 2:30 p.m. The convention receives word the executions are complete. The commune is decapitated. Paris is secure, but security isn't stability, and stability isn't legitimacy. Deputy Paul Barras, who is emerging as a leader of the new regime, addresses the convention. "Citizens, we have ended one form of tyranny. We must ensure we don't begin another. We must govern through law, not fear." The deputies applaud, but applause isn't policy, and policy isn't implementation. 3 p.m. The real work begins. Rebuilding France without terror, the economic crisis deepens by the hour. Without price controls, merchants hoard goods waiting for higher prices. Without coercion, farmers refuse to sell grain to cities. Without surveillance, tax collection collapses. The new government faces an impossible choice: restore coercion and betray their principles, or maintain freedom and watch the economy collapse. 3:30 p.m. Deputy Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours, an economist who had survived the terror, proposes a radical solution: free markets. Eliminate all price controls, eliminate all trade restrictions, let supply and demand determine values. The proposal horrifies the deputies. Free markets had been denounced as counter-revolutionary for 5 years. Implementing them now seems like betraying the revolution itself. But the alternative, continued economic controls without terror's enforcement, appears impossible. 4 p.m. The debate over economic policy reveals deeper philosophical divisions within the new government. Some deputies want to preserve the revolution's egalitarian goals through democratic means. Others want to abandon egalitarian goals for liberal means. Still, others want to restore pre-revolutionary arrangements with constitutional limitations. They had united to overthrow Robespierre. They cannot unite to replace him. 4:30 p.m. News arrives from the armies. Mixed reports. Some units maintain discipline and morale. Others face desertion and mutiny. The absence of the terror's coercion affects military organization differently in different places. General Jean-Baptiste Jourdan reports from the Belgian front. The soldiers fight willingly when they understand their purpose. They resist when they're merely ordered. We need new motivation. Not just new commands. General Lazare Hoche reports from the Vendée. The rebels are gaining strength because they believe we're weakening. We need to demonstrate government authority without demonstrating government brutality. The military situation remains stable but precarious. 5 p.m., 25 hours after Robespierre's execution. The sun begins setting on a transformed Paris. The city buzzes with activity that would have been impossible yesterday. Political clubs meet in private apartments. Newspapers prepare articles that couldn't have been published under censorship. Churches prepare services that couldn't have been held under dechristianization. Civil society emerges from underground, but emergence isn't the same as maturity. Many citizens don't know how to exercise freedoms they hadn't possessed in years. Many institutions don't know how to operate without state control. Freedom requires learning. Learning requires time. Time requires stability. 5:30 p.m. The Jacobin Club's final meeting. 37 members. 5 years ago, they had been the driving force of the revolution. Now they're political refugees in their own country. Jean-Marie Collot d'Herbois makes the final speech. Comrades, we created the Republic. We defended the Republic. We saved the Republic. History will judge whether we also destroyed it. The club votes to transfer its remaining funds to support families of executed members. Then they burn their membership rolls. The Jacobin Club of Paris ceases to exist. 6 p.m. Exactly 24 hours after Robespierre's execution began. The transformation of Paris is complete, but not stable. The old regime is dead. The terror is over. But what replaces them remains unclear. In working-class districts, citizens mourn their protector. In wealthy districts, citizens celebrate their liberation. In middle-class districts, citizens worry about their future. The same city, 3 different revolutions. 6:30 p.m. The markets close with chaos barely controlled. Grain prices have already risen 20%. Meat prices have risen 30%. Cloth prices have risen 15%. And this is just day one. Market women who had demanded price controls now demand price stability. Merchants who had hated price controls now fear price volatility. Customers who had relied on fixed prices now panic about variable costs. The economics of revolution prove simpler than the economics of reconstruction. 7 p.m., the theatrical season officially reopens. Not just individual theaters, the entire cultural life of Paris. At the Comédie Française, they perform Voltaire's Brutus, a play about liberty overthrowing tyranny. The audience cheers every line about freedom. They hiss every line about dictatorship. But they also notice something else. The actors are different. Some performers had been executed during the terror. Others had fled. Still others had informed on colleagues to survive. Culture rebuilds itself, but with gaps that can't be filled. 7:30 p.m. The Thermidorian leadership meets in private to assess their first day in power. Paul Barras reviews the situation. We've ended the terror. We've freed the prisoners. We've executed our enemies. We've started economic reform, but we haven't started governing. Joseph Fouché adds, we know what we're against. We don't know what we're for. Jean Lambert Tallien concludes, we have power. We don't have purpose. This is the Thermidorian reaction's fundamental weakness. Unity in opposition, division in governance. 8 p.m. The Foreign Ministry receives diplomatic communications from across Europe. Every major power is reassessing its relationship with France. Austria proposes peace negotiations. Prussia suggests territorial exchanges. Britain hints at trade resumption. Spain offers military cooperation against common enemies. After 5 years of diplomatic isolation, Europe suddenly wants to engage with France, but engage on what terms? With what government? For what purposes? Foreign Minister Charles-François Delacroix faces opportunities he lacks the authority to pursue. 8:30 p.m., the police commissioner of Paris, Jean-Baptiste Dobson, submits his daily crime report to the convention. Ordinary crime. Robberies up 40%, assaults up 25%, burglaries up 60%, political crime, denunciations down 90%, surveillance arrests down 100%, conspiracy investigations down 75%. The trade-off is stark but clear. Physical security decreases, political freedom increases. Most Parisians consider it a fair exchange. 9 p.m., the breadlines form for tomorrow's distribution. But tonight's conversations are different from this morning's. Citizens discuss not just survival, but improvement. Not just fear, but hope. Not just death, but life. Baker Michel Dubois observes, this morning, customers asked about today's prices. Tonight, they're asking about next week's availability. People are planning again? The psychology of terror gave way to the psychology of uncertainty. Uncertainty is frightening, but it's also liberating. 9:30 p.m. Across Paris, families who had been separated by imprisonment, exile, or execution attempt reunions. Some succeed. Marie-Jeanne Lerminier embraces her husband, released from La Force prison after 6 months. They cry together. They plan together. They hope together. Some fail. Pierre Blanchard searches for his son. Executed 3 weeks ago for counter-revolutionary correspondence, he finds only a grave marker with a number, not a name. Some remain uncertain. Catherine Morel waits for news of her brother, arrested 2 months ago and never seen since. The new government promises information. But promises aren't facts. Reconciliation requires time. Time requires patience. Patience requires hope. 10 p.m. The convention's marathon session continues. 30 hours of continuous debate. The deputies are exhausted, but critical decisions remain. The immediate crisis is financial. The state treasury holds enough money for 3 weeks of government operations. After that, bankruptcy. Unless new revenue sources are found, Deputy Gabriel-Marie Legouvet proposes taxing returned émigrés. Deputy Jacques-Pierre Brissot de Warville's supporters suggest confiscating church property. Deputy Maximilien Inard advocates borrowing from foreign governments. Each solution creates new problems. Taxing émigrés discourages their return. Confiscating church property alienates believers. Borrowing from foreigners compromises independence. Governance proves more difficult than opposition. 10:30 p.m. The City Watch begins its rounds with new instructions. Maintain order without inspiring terror. This proves practically impossible. Criminals who fear death behave differently from criminals who fear imprisonment. Citizens who expect surveillance behave differently from citizens who expect privacy. The watch commander, Antoine Fouquier-Richer, writes, "We must learn new methods of law enforcement. The old methods were brutal but effective. The new methods must be humane and effective. We don't know if that's possible." 11 p.m., the salons reopen across Paris. For the first time in months, intellectuals, artists, politicians, and merchants gather to discuss ideas without fearing denunciation. At Madame de Staël's salon, the conversation focuses on constitutional theory. At Madame Roland's salon, she had been executed, but her followers continue meeting. The discussion centers on economic policy. At Olympe de Gouges' salon, she too had been executed, but her memory inspires continued gatherings. The debate addresses women's rights. The life of the mind resurrects itself overnight. But resurrection isn't the same as recovery. Many of France's best thinkers are dead. Many of its finest artists are exiled. Many of its most innovative scientists are silenced. The terror's intellectual costs will take generations to calculate. 11:30 p.m. The Conciergerie prison prepares for its new role, holding common criminals instead of political prisoners. Warden Antoine Fouquier-Richer reviews the transformation. Yesterday we held 800 political prisoners and 50 common criminals. Today we hold 50 political prisoners and 100 common criminals. Tomorrow we expect to hold 0 political prisoners and 200 common criminals. The mathematics of incarceration reflect the mathematics of revolution. Midnight. Exactly 24 hours after Robespierre's execution, Paris sleeps fitfully but peacefully. The terror is over. The Thermidorian reaction has begun. But what the Thermidorian reaction represents remains unclear. Some see it as the revolution's fulfillment. Democracy without dictatorship, freedom without anarchy, justice without terror. Others see it as the revolution's betrayal. Bourgeois interests replacing popular power, property rights superseding human rights, order trumping equality. Still, others see it as the revolution's natural evolution. Radical phase giving way to moderate phase. Destructive period yielding to constructive period. Revolutionary war transitioning to revolutionary peace. The truth contains elements of all three interpretations. 12:30 a.m., July 30th. The city that had trembled under the incorruptible's rule now breathes under its successor's uncertainty. But uncertainty isn't chaos, and chaos isn't freedom. The next morning brings new challenges that the previous 24 hours had only glimpsed. Economic collapse, foreign intervention, social division, political fragmentation. The Thermidorians had united to destroy Robespierre. Now they must unite to build something better. Their success or failure will determine whether the French Revolution ends in liberty or license, democracy or dictatorship, republic or empire. 1 a.m. The final revelation comes not from Paris, but from a small town near Arras, where Robespierre was born. A local official, sorting through municipal records, discovers a letter written by young Maximilian to his father 25 years earlier. I want to serve justice and defend the innocent. I want to make the world better than I found it. I pray I never become what I oppose. The letter reaches Paris 3 days later. By then, the Thermidorian reaction is consolidating power through methods that would have horrified the young idealist from Arras. Revolution devours its children, but sometimes its children deserve devouring. The guillotine that had claimed 17,000 victims claims its final political target in Robespierre. After July 28, 1794, it will execute criminals, not enemies. It will serve justice, not terror. Paris had reacted to Robespierre's execution with celebration, confusion, and calculation. 24 hours later, it faced the future with hope, fear, and uncertainty. The revolution continued, but it continued differently. The crowd that had cheered Robespierre's death discovered that ending terror was easier than building trust. The deputies who had overthrown dictatorship learned that destroying power was simpler than creating authority. The citizens who had demanded freedom found that liberty required responsibility they weren't sure they possessed, but they tried. And their trying, successful or not, marked the moment when the French Revolution stopped being about dying for principles and started being about living for them. The transformation of Paris, in 24 hours after Robespierre's execution, revealed the transformation of revolution itself, from destruction to construction, from fear to hope, from death to life. Terror had ended. Democracy remained to be built.